Imagine trying to manage the food supply for hundreds of hungry knights, servants, and nobles in a massive medieval fortress. There were no refrigerators, no freezers, not even ice boxes. Yet these stone strongholds somehow kept food edible for months or even years. It sounds impossible today, right? But for centuries, castle kitchens perfected the art of preserving food using surprisingly advanced methods that allowed them to store enough provisions to feed over 1,000 people for 6 months. So, how did they achieve this? Let's start below the castle. Medieval builders discovered something brilliant when they dug deep beneath their fortresses. These enormous underground cellars acted like nature's refrigerator, maintaining a constant temperature around 55 degrees Fahrenheit, 13 degrees Celsius all year long. The deeper they dug, the cooler it became, and castle designers took full advantage of this natural occurrence. The cellars were not just simple storage rooms. They were carefully planned networks where different foods were stored at different levels to optimize freshness. The lowest levels, reaching temperatures in the high 40s, held milk, cheese, and fresh meat. A few steps above, you would find wine storage, and keeping the nobles' wine fresh was often considered more important than preventing meat from spoiling. The upper levels stored hardier items like root vegetables, apples, and preserved goods. These subterranean networks were so extensive that servants sometimes got lost in them. They began leaving chalk marks on walls to navigate medieval breadcrumbs, if you will. One particularly unlucky servant at Dover Castle went missing for 2 days before being discovered asleep next to a wine barrel. His excuse? He claimed he got lost, and the wine helped him stay warm. Surprisingly, he kept his job. Not everything ran smoothly in these underground storage areas. Rats were a constant problem. One record mentions an entire winter's cheese supply destroyed by a rodent invasion. Flooding also posed a serious issue. Few things ruin a day like discovering your root cellar has become an underground pool. Even with impressive cellars, preservation challenges persisted, which is why salt became medieval Europe's most valuable food preservation tool. Have you ever wondered why someone is said to be worth their salt, or why we get paid a salary? Both expressions come from a time when salt literally had the value of gold. Medieval castles went through enormous quantities of salt. Records show an average-sized castle would use up to 5,000 pounds of salt per year just to maintain food freshness. That is enough salt to fill a small bedroom. The castle's saltmaster, a real and respected role, knew which type of salt worked best for each food. Fine white salt preserved dairy and delicate meats, while coarse sea salt was used for tougher cuts and fish. The science was straightforward. Salt drew water out of food and from any bacteria trying to spoil it. Without water, spoilage could not occur, keeping castle residents well fed. Salt merchants became the medieval equivalent of wealthy entrepreneurs. 1 pound of quality salt could buy an entire sheep, and the most successful traders controlled whole fleets of ships. This sometimes led to criminal activity. Records show merchants caught selling fake salt made from crushed white stones. Castle physicians even used salted foods as remedies. Headache? Try some salted fish? Stomach pain? Preserved lemons could help. Considering medieval medicine, salt was probably one of the more reasonable treatments prescribed. Salt was not the only method castles used to preserve food. Smoking played a major role. The medieval castle smoking yard was like an ancient barbecue venue, without napkins or debates about sauces. These smokehouses, processing up to 200 pounds of meat per day during peak periods, were located just outside the castle walls, far enough to prevent fires but close enough to monitor. Court records indicate a castle housing 150 people needed about 18,000 pounds of smoked meat to survive the winter. No wonder these smokehouses were heavily guarded. You did not want someone stealing the winter's supply of smoked bacon. Different woods produced unique flavors. Oak was the standard for most meats. It burned slowly and steadily, producing rich smoke that could preserve meat for up to 4 months. Applewood was reserved for special occasions, ideal for smoking wild boar or venison for the Lord's feasts. Alderwood paired best with fish, giving salmon and trout the delicate smoke flavor we still enjoy today. The smoke master knew which wood to use and the timing required for each type. Late autumn meant smokehouses operated at full capacity, sometimes with 3 to 4 smoking chambers running at once. The process was lengthy. Some cuts of meat remained in smoke for weeks, with hams requiring up to 3 months to cure fully. Records show smoke masters working in shifts to maintain fires day and night. The remarkable part is that many medieval smoking techniques closely resemble modern barbecue methods. While smoke preserved meat and fish, vegetables required a different approach, demanding greater effort. Castle kitchens elevated pickling to a science. Archaeologists have discovered enormous pickling vessels in castle ruins, capable of holding up to 100 gallons, enough to pickle 800 pounds of vegetables at a time. Dover Castle records reveal that 40 to 60% of the annual vegetable harvest was pickled, ensuring a year-round supply of vitamin C, but they did not limit themselves to cucumbers and onions. Castle cooks preserved everything they could find. Cabbage? Naturally? Turnips? Absolutely. Eggs and beet juice? Without question. The juice turned a deep purple that probably made more than a few castle children laugh during meals. Some castles even pickled imported fruits, like lemons and oranges, treating them as luxury items reserved for the lord and his family. One medieval cookbook recounts a grumpy baron threatening to throw his cook in the dungeon for giving his specially pickled plums to ordinary soldiers. Castle gardens were more than ornamental. Entire sections were devoted to growing herbs, specifically for pickling. Dill, garlic, and mustard seeds were staples in castle herb gardens. But the most important was vinegar production. Every serious castle had a vinegar-making operation, usually tucked away in a corner, since fermenting vinegar does not produce pleasant smells. The pickling process was so crucial that many castles employed a dedicated pickle master who recorded every batch meticulously. Some of these medieval recipe books have survived for centuries, showing exactly how the process worked. Certain techniques were remarkably sophisticated. They understood that adding grape leaves to jars kept vegetables crisp, a trick modern picklers still use today. Speaking of preservation methods that endured, there was one sweet solution that medieval castles relied on endlessly. In fact, archaeologists have found it still edible after thousands of years. Castle residents knew honey's incredible preservation powers, which is why they maintained extensive apiaries about a quarter-mile from the fortress. These hives were placed strategically near flowering meadows and orchards. A typical castle had around 100 hives spread across several locations, producing enough honey for food preservation and medicinal use. Beekeepers lived in small cottages near their hives, making them the only skilled workers who did not reside inside the castle. They received extra ale rations, as medieval people believed drinking helped prevent bee stings and earned surprisingly good wages. The castle infirmary stored honey separately, using different varieties for specific purposes. Light spring honey treated coughs and wounds, while darker autumn honey preserved fruits and meats. They even made special honey-preserved foods for sick patients. Fruits preserved in honey served as a medieval version of get-well treats. Honey was used creatively in castle kitchens. Fresh fruit was dipped in warmed honey to coat it. Root vegetables were layered in honey-soaked cloths, and fish was sometimes packed in honey for transport. One recipe even describes preserving whole geese in honey, though it does not explain how the cooks kept servants from sneaking tastes. Honey's preserving power is impressive. Its high sugar content prevents bacteria growth. Natural hydrogen peroxide kills germs, and its acidity stops many microbes. Bees also add an enzyme that produces honey superoxide, making it virtually indestructible. It is no surprise that castles valued beekeepers almost as highly as master builders. Speaking of builders, the architecture itself played a key role in preserving food. Every stone, hallway, and window contributed to maintaining freshness. Castle architects were essentially playing an enormous game of Tetris with storage. Each room had to be carefully planned, from grain silos holding 20,000 pounds of wheat to small cheese caves with perfect humidity. Room sizes were calculated using formulas based on population. For every 100 people, about 1,000 square feet of specialized storage was required. The real innovation was in ventilation. Castle builders created natural airflow using pressure differential principles. Tall, narrow shafts ran from the deepest cellars to the highest towers. Wind at the top created a vacuum that pulled cool air from underground. One Welsh castle managed this so well that servants spent summers in storage rooms to escape the heat. Pest control was integrated into the walls. Ledges and barriers prevented rats from climbing, angled walls hindered mice, and some mortar mixes included natural pest deterrents, like herbs. Cat runs allowed cats to patrol narrow passages between walls. The castle kitchen evolved into a system of specialized spaces. The buttery stored drinks, the pantry held bread and dry goods, and the spicery stored expensive seasonings with controlled humidity. Some castles had rooms specifically for aging cheese, with shelves angled to let whey drain. One steward even complained that a cheese room was too close to the Lord's chambers, as the aroma was too strong. Architecture alone could not preserve food without skilled staff. A small army of workers managed the system. Running a castle kitchen was like overseeing a small city. The hierarchy started with the master cook. Under his supervision, roughly 50 workers ran the massive castle food operation, with about 15 dedicated solely to preserving and storing supplies. Salary records from one castle show the preservation master, a specialized cook, earned the equivalent of 30 sheep each year. Not bad for keeping noble dinners safe from spoilage. Kitchen apprentices began training young, usually around 12 years old. Before handling pots and pans, they spent 2 years learning essential preservation skills, such as identifying spoiling meat by smell, rotating food stores properly, and preventing greedy nobles from consuming winter stores too early. One surviving apprentice diary complains about memorizing 200 storage rules before being allowed to handle anything more important than turnips. Inventory management was seamlessly integrated into daily routines. Head cooks used tally sticks, wooden sticks marked with notches, and parchment ledgers. Each type of food had a unique tracking method. Wine barrels received chalk marks, grains were measured with standardized scoops, and preserved meats were numbered with tags. Archaeological digs have even uncovered loaded dice near hearths, scratched recipes on kitchen walls, and hints that staff played games during breaks. Even with such organization, seasonal changes challenged the system. Each time of year brought distinct food preservation tasks. Spring began with a rush to pickle and smoke remaining winter stores before spoilage set in. By early summer, kitchens processed fresh herbs, drying them in hanging bundles from the rafters. Summer delivered a parade of fruits and vegetables demanding immediate attention. Records show one castle handled over 2,000 pounds of fresh produce during a single week in August. Autumn was the busiest preservation period. Castle kitchens operated like non-stop factories, with teams managing smoking, salting, and pickling at the same time. Festivals often celebrated preservation efforts, though records indicate these events included as much ale drinking as food work. One document mentions a cook who accidentally pickled his keys after a particularly festive gathering. Winter brought its own challenges. The master cook carefully calculated how much preserved food to use weekly. Generosity in December could leave families hungry by March. Castle records divided winter into 3 periods: fresh stores, early winter using newly preserved items; deep stores, midwinter relying on long-lasting preserves; and late winter, when cooks improvised with what remained. Weather monitoring was crucial. Staff developed detailed systems to predict conditions, noting everything from cloud formations to animal behavior. One cook wrote that early mouse raids indicated a harsh winter, a form of medieval meteorology. Despite careful planning, disasters still occurred. The famous siege of Dover Castle in 1216 tested the preservation system. Supplies allowed the castle to hold out over 3 months, but maintaining edibility was vital. When the main cellar flooded, staff moved tons of preserved food to higher levels in a single night, though one unlucky cook spent 6 hours locked in a storage room. Records reveal creative emergency measures. When rats destroyed grain bags, cooks stored supplies in sealed clay pots. After mold ruined a season's cheese, they rotated wheels daily and rubbed them with vinegar. Quality control in medieval kitchens became serious business. Food tasters evaluated spoilage as well as poison. Detecting decay was an art. Cooks relied on all senses. Tapping jars produced different sounds. Soft-cured meats signaled trouble, and the color of pickled vegetables indicated freshness. One manual joked that green pickled eggs should be fed to enemies. Records indicate roughly 20% of preserved food spoiled annually. Considering there was no refrigeration, that loss was reasonable. Backup strategies included sprouting grains on windowsills, smoking available meats, and converting questionable wine into vinegar. Medieval preservation techniques continue to influence modern food practices. These methods were not only about preventing spoilage, but also developing unique flavors we enjoy today. That smoky flavor in specialty ham traces back to medieval smoke masters. Artisanal pickles at markets often use recipes recognizable to castle cooks. Even family vegetable preservation methods may have roots in medieval traditions.